My darlings, I see you, all of you. 5 signs tonight, and I want to begin with the exact promise in the title, because it is an unusual one, and I would rather earn it properly than simply repeat it at you. These 5 zodiac signs will receive the apology they stopped waiting for, and I am taking them in a specific order this evening: Libra, Pisces, Cancer, Gemini, and Leo, ending with Leo, because Leo receives the strongest message in the whole of tonight's reading, and I would rather tell you that now than have you miss it 3 signs from now. But I want to sit with the strange part of that title for a moment, because I think it is actually the most important sentence I am going to say to you tonight, and it deserves more than a passing mention before we move on. Stopped waiting. Not still waiting, not waiting harder. Stopped. And I want to ask you something that I think will feel uncomfortable for about 10 seconds, and then become, I hope, the most useful discomfort you have felt all week. Why would that be the precondition? Why would an apology, of all things, arrive more readily to somebody who has genuinely let go of needing it than to somebody who is still actively hoping for it every single day? I am going to answer that properly tonight, with real astrology behind it, rather than a comforting slogan, because I think you deserve the actual mechanism rather than a nice-sounding coincidence. I am Madame Aurora, 35 years studying the stars from my office in Manhattan, and let me tell you what is actually happening in the sky that makes this true, because it is permanent. It happens several times a year for the whole of your life, and almost nobody explains it to you properly. Mercury goes retrograde. You have heard the phrase, my darlings, probably rolled your eyes at it once or twice, and I want to tell you what it is actually for, because the popular version, everything breaks, nothing works, communication falls apart, is only the surface of it. Mercury retrograde is not a chaos event. It is a review period. Several times a year, Mercury appears from where we stand on Earth to slow down, stop, and travel backward across the sky for roughly 3 weeks, before slowing again and resuming its forward path. And here is the part that matters for tonight. Mercury retrograde does not deliver new things. It was never built to. Direct motion, the ordinary forward-moving Mercury you live with for most of the year, is what brings you new messages, new conversations, new information moving toward the future. Retrograde motion runs the other direction. It brings back what was left unfinished. Old messages, old conversations, people you had genuinely stopped expecting to hear from, resurfacing, because the review period exists precisely to revisit what direct motion never got the chance to properly close. An apology, my darlings, is the single most retrograde object that exists in human communication. It is not new information. It is old, unfinished business, something that should have been said at the time and was not, sitting exactly where it was left. Which means an apology was never going to arrive on Mercury's forward motion, the way a new invitation or a fresh piece of news might. It was always going to arrive on the retrograde, because the retrograde is the only part of the cycle actually built to deliver precisely that kind of object. Now let me answer the question I asked you a moment ago, because this is where the real mechanism lives. If you are actively waiting, my darlings, checking, hoping, scanning the horizon for something new to arrive, you are oriented toward direct motion. You are facing forward, watching for the next thing, in exactly the posture that receives fresh arrivals and is, frankly, quite poor at recognizing an old one when it finally surfaces, because you were looking the wrong direction for it entirely. And when you genuinely stop waiting, when you build a life that no longer requires that particular arrival to feel complete, you are not giving up. You are simply turning to face the room you are actually standing in. And it is from that position, facing your own life rather than the horizon, that a retrograde arrival, something old, something backward-moving, something that was never going to come from ahead of you, can actually reach you and be recognized for what it is. That is not magical thinking, my darlings. It is the difference between watching one direction and being available in another, and it is why every single person I have watched receive a genuine, long overdue apology received it after she had stopped looking for it, and almost never while she was still checking. Now let me show you the card, because it is the oldest image this practice has for exactly what tonight is about, and I want to give you the detail almost nobody mentions. The card is the 6 of Cups. Two figures in an old courtyard, one taller than the other, handing over a cup filled not with liquid but with white flowers. Around them, 5 more cups, each one also filled with flowers rather than anything meant to be drunk. Behind them, a quiet village, timbered houses, a sense of somewhere old and settled rather than somewhere new. And in a good number of traditional decks, in the distance, a small figure walking away, out of the courtyard entirely, toward the buildings beyond it. Everybody reads this card the same way, and I do not think the popular reading is wrong. Nostalgia. Childhood. Something sweet from the past returning. A reunion with an innocence to it. That is genuinely what the card means. But notice what is actually in the cups, my darlings, because it is the detail that makes this reading useful rather than merely pretty. Flowers, not wine. Not something to be consumed, weighed, tested for its usefulness, or put to any practical purpose at all. An offering that exists purely as feeling, sentiment, the thing itself, and nothing more. That is precisely the shape an apology takes when it finally arrives, my darlings, and I want you to release, right now, any expectation that it will arrive as a solution. It is not going to fix what was broken, restore the years that passed, or undo the actual damage done. It offers exactly what is in those cups. Flowers. Something real, something felt, something worth receiving on its own terms, and nothing more than that. And a person who requires it to be more than flowers is going to find every single apology she ever receives disappointing, regardless of how sincerely it was given. And now the figure in the distance, walking away, because I think it is the part of this card that matters most for tonight. That figure is not fleeing the reunion. Look at the whole scene properly. The 2 children in the foreground are exchanging the cup, present, engaged, entirely inside the moment of the offering, and somebody else, further back, is simply continuing on, toward wherever she was already going, unbothered by the sweetness happening behind her. My darlings, that is the whole lesson of tonight's card. You are permitted to receive the flowers, fully, warmly, without it requiring you to stop walking toward your own life in order to do so. The reunion can happen in the courtyard, briefly, sweetly, and you can still be the figure continuing on toward the village beyond it, because that is what a stopped waiting life actually looks like. Not frozen, watching the courtyard forever, moving, steadily, toward something of your own, with the courtyard simply available to step into when the flowers finally arrive, rather than the place you have been standing, unmoving, this entire time. Now let me give you the 4 disguises an apology wears when it finally arrives, because it very rarely arrives the way you rehearsed it, and I do not want you to miss your own the way so many people miss theirs by watching only for the version they imagined. The first is action without the word. They do not say sorry. Not once. Possibly not ever. But something changes, quietly and consistently, in how they behave toward you specifically. They show up for something they would have skipped before. They ask a question they never used to think to ask. A behavior that had been fixed for years suddenly, permanently, adjusts, in a direction that only makes sense as an amends, even though the word itself never appears anywhere in it. The second is the oblique reference. They bring it up sideways, almost in passing, mentioning the situation without directly naming what they did, testing, in a small and cautious way, whether the subject is safe to approach at all before committing to anything further. My darlings, this one is easy to dismiss as insufficient, and I would ask you not to, because for a great many people the oblique reference is the very first crack in a door that has been sealed for years. And the second, more direct thing, genuinely might follow it, if you leave the door open, rather than demanding it be flung wide on the first attempt. The third is the improved version of themselves. No acknowledgement of the past at all. Simply a considerably better version of how they treat you now, as though the treatment itself were the apology, offered without ever admitting there was anything to apologize for. I want to be honest with you about this one, because your instinct will be to reject it as cowardice, and sometimes it is. But functionally, my darlings, a person who has genuinely changed how she treats you has, in the most practical sense available, already apologized. She simply did it with her behavior instead of her mouth, and behavior is, in my experience, the harder currency to fake. And the fourth is the direct, delayed message. The actual apology. Plain, unambiguous, containing the word itself, arriving years after it should have. This is the one everybody pictures when they imagine receiving an apology, and it is, in my experience, the rarest of the four, and also the hardest to receive at face value, because your sign will be tempted to discount it for its lateness, as though the delay itself cancels the content. It does not, my darlings. A true thing said late is still a true thing. Any one of these four can be tonight's baton, and I would ask you, across the next several weeks, to watch for all four, rather than only the one you have been picturing, because the one that actually arrives is very often not the one you rehearsed. Now let us begin. Let us go to Libra. My darling Libra, your sign is ruled by Venus, the planet of value and of the fair exchange, and I want you to understand why an unreceived apology sits so much heavier with you than it does with almost anybody else. Your sign perceives imbalance the way other signs perceive temperature. Constantly, automatically, without needing to think about it. A relationship in which something was done, unaddressed, unaccounted for, sits in you as a scale permanently tipped to one side, and your sign, more than any other, finds that tilted scale genuinely difficult to simply live beside. You have likely tried, more than once, to restore the balance yourself, smoothing things over, extending warmth that was not entirely yours to extend, in an attempt to level a scale that only the other person actually has the weight to correct. When your apology arrives, my darling, it is going to feel, more than for any of tonight's other four signs, like an actual physical release. The scale settling. And I would ask you to notice, when it comes, whether you immediately begin managing the aftermath, smoothing the reunion, making sure everyone involved feels comfortable with the new arrangement, before you have actually let yourself feel the relief of the balance being restored. Let the scale settle first, my darling. The managing can wait a day. And I want to add one caution specific to your sign, because it is the one most likely to undo its own progress here. Do not, in the relief of the scale settling, immediately tip it the other way by overthinking, over-explaining how much it meant, or reassuring the other person so thoroughly that you end up managing their comfort about having apologized. The apology was theirs to give. Let it simply sit there, received, without your usual instinct to smooth the moment for both of you at once. Now let me speak to Pisces. My darling Pisces, your situation is the most unusual of tonight's five, because I suspect you forgave the person in question a very long time ago, privately, on your own, without ever needing them to say a single word. Your sign absorbs and dissolves in a way no other sign quite manages, and a considerable number of you have already released the resentment itself, genuinely, years before anybody offered you anything in return for releasing it. So the apology, when it arrives for you, is not going to function as closure the way it will for the other four signs tonight. You closed that particular door yourself, quietly, some time ago. What it is going to do instead, my darling, is considerably more specific, and I think you will find it moving in a way you do not fully expect. It is going to confirm that it actually happened. Your sign, more than any other, is prone to a very particular kind of doubt over time, wondering whether you remembered the situation accurately, whether you were perhaps too sensitive, whether the whole thing was smaller than you have been carrying it as. An apology, arriving now, is not primarily going to heal a wound you have already tended yourself. It is going to validate your own memory, plainly, from an external source, and I want you to let that validation matter, even though you did the actual forgiving without it. I want to say one thing about why this matters more than it might sound like it should. Your sign's gift is empathy so complete that you can often see a situation from the other person's side almost as clearly as your own, and that gift, turned on your own history, has a specific cost. You can talk yourself into almost any version of events, including the version where you were the unreasonable one. An external confirmation does something your own considerable understanding cannot do for itself. It settles the account from outside your own capacity to reinterpret it, which is the one place your sign genuinely struggles to settle anything on its own. Now, before I go to Cancer, let me pause for a moment. If what I have said so far is landing, tap that little like button below this video. It is a small gesture and it does something real, which is tell YouTube to carry this to somebody who forgave privately, years ago, and still, quietly, wonders whether she remembered it correctly. And if you are not yet subscribed, this is the moment, because 3 signs remain, and Leo's is the strongest message in the entire reading. Now let me speak to Cancer. My darling Cancer, your apology is likely to arrive through family, or through something adjacent to family, because your sign holds its history there more than in any other single place. And I want to tell you about the specific difficulty your sign faces in receiving it. You are, more than any other sign, the protector of the family narrative. The version everyone agrees to tell at gatherings, the smoothed-over account that keeps the peace. The story in which nobody has to be the villain, because being the villain would fracture something your sign has spent years holding together. And that instinct, my darling, is precisely what makes it so difficult for you to receive an apology when it finally arrives, because receiving it honestly requires acknowledging, at least to yourself, that the smoothed-over version was never quite accurate. When it comes, and I believe it is coming, my darling, notice whether your first instinct is to immediately minimize it on the other person's behalf. Oh, it wasn't that bad. You don't need to say all that. Your sign does this reflexively, protecting the giver of the apology from the full weight of what she is admitting to, and in doing so, very often protects yourself from having to feel the full weight of what you actually experienced. Let the apology be as large as it actually is, my darling, at least once, before you soften it into something smaller for everybody's comfort, including your own. Now let me speak to Gemini. My darling Gemini, I want to tell you something that I think will make everything I have said tonight feel considerably more literal for your sign than for anybody else's. Mercury is not simply the mechanism I described at the start of this reading for everyone. It is your own ruling planet. The retrograde I have been describing, the review period, the delivery of old, unfinished business, is happening inside the exact planet that governs your entire sign, which means the apology I have been promising tonight is, for you specifically, considerably more likely to arrive in the 4th disguise rather than any of the other 3. Words, my darling. Not a changed behavior you have to interpret. Not an oblique reference you have to decide whether to pursue. An actual message, written or spoken, arriving through the exact channel your sign has always trusted most, containing something close to the direct thing you have been waiting for. I want to prepare you for one particular difficulty, because it is specific to your sign, and I do not think anybody has named it for you before. When the message arrives, your instinct is going to be to respond immediately, fluently, with the perfect answer already assembling itself before you have finished reading the first line. My darling, do not answer immediately. Let the message simply exist, unanswered, for a day, before your own considerable skill with words converts a genuine, possibly imperfect apology into an exchange you are already managing, rather than one you are actually receiving. And now let me speak to Leo, and I have saved you for last, because your version of this is the one I most want you to hear properly. My darling Leo, I have spoken to your sign before about apologies, about the many forms regret can take, and I am not going to repeat that reading tonight. What I want to give you instead is the one question that actually determines whether yours lands, because I think it is the piece nobody has asked you directly. When it arrives, my darling, will you be able to receive it without an audience? I want you to sit with that, because your sign's instinct, more than any other tonight, is to want the apology witnessed. Not out of vanity, whatever people assume about you, because being wronged in front of others, and finally being vindicated in front of nobody at all, feels, to your sign, like an unequal exchange. The wound was public in some sense, so the repair ought to be as well. My darling, I understand that instinct completely, and I am going to ask you to release it anyway, because in my experience, the apology that actually arrives for a Leo very rarely comes with the audience attached. It comes privately, quietly, often in a single conversation or a single message with nobody else present to see it land. And a Leo who is waiting for the witnessed version is going to let the real one pass by unrecognized, the same way a person facing the wrong direction misses a retrograde arrival entirely. Let it be small, my darling. Let it be private. The sun does not require an audience to know it is shining, and neither, in the end, does this. There is a second version of the difficulty worth naming, because it is quieter than the audience question and arrives just after it. Once you have received it privately, without witnesses, your sign will feel a pull to tell the story afterward, to somebody, in some form, partly to process it, and partly, if you are honest, to finally have the audience you originally wanted. I would not deny you that entirely, my darling, because your sign genuinely does process best out loud. I would only ask that you let the private moment be complete in itself first, fully felt, before you turn it into the version you tell. I want to add one further note for your sign, because I think it will help you recognize the moment when it comes, rather than second-guessing it afterward. It is very unlikely to arrive with any ceremony at all, no occasion built around it, no sense of ritual weight attached to the timing. It will very likely land in the middle of something ordinary, a phone call about something else entirely, a text that starts with a different subject and drifts, almost accidentally, into the thing that actually matters. Your sign expects significant moments to announce themselves as significant. This one, for you specifically, is not going to. Now, my darlings, let me speak to the 7 signs I have not named tonight, because Mercury retrogrades for everyone, several times a year, and I do not believe in a reading that gives 5 of you the whole of my attention and leaves everybody else standing outside. Aries, yours is likely to arrive abruptly, without warning, in the middle of an otherwise ordinary conversation, and your instinct will be to move past it quickly rather than let it land. Let it land. Taurus, yours will arrive slowly, in stages, through consistent behavior rather than a single moment, and your sign's patience is precisely the quality that will let you recognize it building rather than dismissing the early signs as coincidence. Virgo, yours will very likely arrive with more detail and more precision than you actually need, because the person offering it will have thought carefully about exactly what to say, and your instinct to find the flaw in it should be set aside in favor of simply receiving the care that went into the attempt. Scorpio, yours will arrive only once you have stopped testing for it, because your sign's habit of watching for insincerity, understandable as it is precisely the posture that keeps a genuine offering at arm's length long enough to look insincere by the time it finally lands. Sagittarius, yours will arrive from a distance, possibly from somebody no longer in regular contact with you, reaching across time in a way that will surprise you with how much it still matters. Capricorn, yours will arrive formally, in a considered, deliberate form rather than an offhand one, because the person offering it, like you, believes some things deserve to be done properly rather than casually. And Aquarius, yours is likely to arrive through an unconventional channel, not the conversation you would have expected, and I would ask you not to discount it for arriving strangely, since your own sign has never much respected the conventional route either. Every one of you has a retrograde arrival somewhere ahead, my darlings, whether or not your sign was one of tonight's 5. Now, before I go further, do something with me. It takes 20 seconds and it works whatever your sign. Think of the specific apology, the one that arrived when I first said the word tonight, whether you expected it to or not. Now ask yourself, honestly, using the 4 disguises I gave you earlier, whether something has already arrived and you filed it under something else. A changed behavior you decided did not count because the word was missing. An oblique reference you brushed past because it was not direct enough. You may find one already sitting there, unrecognized. You may find nothing yet, and that is simply where you are in the cycle. Hold your answer. I am going to come back to it. Now let me tell you about Vesper. Vesper was a Pisces client of mine, born in early March, who came to me some years ago about her father. He had, when she was in her 20s, said something to her at a family gathering, in front of several relatives, that she described to me, even a decade later, with total precision, which told me she had turned it over many times before she ever said it aloud to another person. It was not a single dramatic event. It was a pattern of remarks, culminating that particular evening in something specifically cruel about a choice she had made. And she had left the gathering early, and had, in her own words, quietly forgiven him within about 2 years, entirely privately, without ever discussing it with him again. She came to me, not because she was still angry, but because she had begun to doubt her own memory of it. Her father had, in the intervening decade, become in many ways a kinder person, gentler with her siblings' children, softer in general company, and she found herself wondering, increasingly, whether the evening she remembered so precisely had actually been as bad as she recalled, or whether she had built it into something larger than it was. He raised it himself, unprompted, at her mother's 80th birthday, 9 years after the original evening. Not dramatically, he simply said, quietly, while they were alone in a kitchen for a few minutes, that he had thought about that night more than she probably realized, and that he had been wrong, and that he was sorry, and that he had waited far too long to say so, because he had been ashamed of it for most of those 9 years. Vesper told me she had already forgiven him, genuinely, long before that kitchen conversation, and that the forgiveness itself did not change in that moment. What changed, she said, was considerably more specific. She said, "I stopped wondering if I made it up." He remembered it exactly the way I did, in the same detail, with the same shame attached to it that I had been carrying as grief. I did not need him to apologize in order to have healed. I needed him to apologize in order to know I had not imagined the thing I was healing from. Now, before I go on, let me pause for a moment. If Vesper's story landed somewhere true, if you recognized your own quiet doubt about whether you remembered it correctly, tap that little like button below this video. It is the simplest way to tell YouTube to carry this to somebody who needs to know she did not imagine it. And if you are not yet subscribed, this is the moment. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because I make these readings for every sign, and I make them so they can be found whenever somebody needs them, rather than only during a particular week. Wait. Before I continue, I need to interrupt myself, because I know precisely what a portion of you is thinking, and I would rather deal with it directly than let it run underneath everything else. You are thinking, Aurora, what if it genuinely does not come? What if the person is gone, or has decided, plainly, that she is never going to say it, and I have just spent half an hour hoping for something you cannot actually promise me? My darling, I want to answer that honestly, because I told you at the start of this hour that I would rather give you the true mechanism than a comforting slogan, and the true mechanism includes this. Some retrogrades pass without delivering the specific thing you were hoping this particular one would deliver. I cannot tell you with certainty that the exact person, in the exact form you are picturing, is going to reach out to you specifically. I do not know your situation, and any astrologer who promises you certainty about another person's future choices is telling you something they cannot actually know. What I can tell you, with considerably more confidence, the posture I described at the beginning of this reading, turning to face your own life rather than scanning the horizon for their arrival, is available to you regardless of whether they ever say the word, and a considerable amount of what actually needs healing in a withheld apology is not, in the end, about receiving their sentence. It is about no longer organizing your own life around the absence of it. If you are certain, from long experience, that this particular door is simply not going to open, my darling, I would not ask you to keep it ajar indefinitely on the strength of tonight's reading. Grieve the version where they said it, if you need to, exactly as you would grieve anything else that was owed to you and never delivered. And build the stopped waiting life anyway, not as a strategy for finally attracting the apology, but because it is the better life regardless of whether the flowers ever arrive in the cup. Now let me tell you the other kind of story, because I have told you the one where it healed cleanly. Honor was a Cancer client of mine who came to me over a period of some years about her mother, and I want to tell her story carefully because it complicates everything I have said tonight in a way I think is genuinely important. Her mother had been, by Honor's careful and fair account, a difficult and often unkind parent through the whole of Honor's childhood and into her 20s, critical in ways that had left a mark Honor had spent a great deal of adult life working to undo. In her mother's late 70s, after a health scare, something in her softened, and over about 2 years, she offered Honor something close to a genuine apology, in stages, across several conversations, naming specific incidents, taking real responsibility for a pattern she had previously always denied. It was, by any reasonable measure, exactly the apology Honor had spent decades not expecting to receive. And Honor told me, in the year that followed, that she found herself furious in a way she had not anticipated at all, and considerably angrier than she had been before the apology arrived. I asked her to help me understand that, because it seemed, on its surface, to run against everything a person would expect. She said, "I spent 30 years building a life that did not need her approval. I became somebody who could survive without the apology. And now that I have it, I keep thinking about the version of me who needed it and never got it in time to actually use it. She is angry, and I cannot apologize to her on my mother's behalf, and my mother cannot reach her either. The version of me she owed it to is not available anymore. She only gets the version who built a life around not needing it, and that version, it turns out, has some resentment about being the one who has to receive it now instead. My darling Cancers, I tell you Honor's story because I think it is more honest than the version where everything simply resolves. The apology was real. Her mother's remorse was, by every account, genuine, and it still did not erase the decades in between, or the version of Honor who needed it most and did not get it, and I would be doing you a disservice if I let you believe that receiving the apology automatically settles every layer of what the absence of it cost you. Honor is, some years on, in a considerably better place with her mother than she ever expected to be. She also told me, quite plainly, that she still grieves the daughter who waited and gave up, even while she is genuinely grateful for the mother who eventually arrived. Pause with me for a moment. I know this has been a great deal. If this reading is bringing you something tonight, would you do me 3 small things? Like this video. It tells YouTube this matters to real people, and it carries it to somebody who is, right now, angry at herself for feeling complicated about getting the very thing she thought she wanted. Subscribe and turn on the bell if you have not, because I make these readings for every sign, and I intend to keep making them. And write to me in the comments, and I want the specific thing rather than the general thing. Tell me your sign, and tell me which of the 4 disguises you think yours is most likely to arrive in. Action without the word. The oblique reference, the improved version, or the direct, delayed message. And if you have been here a while, membership on this channel means readings reach you before they are published, and it means you and I actually speak in the comments, because I read member comments first, and I answer there more often and more personally than I am able to anywhere else. Now let me give you the practical part, because a promise without a method is only a comfort. There are 4 things, and they apply across all 5 of tonight's signs. The first, build the stopped waiting life deliberately, rather than waiting for the feeling of having stopped to simply arrive on its own. This is not about pretending you no longer care. It is about redirecting your actual attention, your actual plans, your actual sense of what a good week looks like, toward things that do not require their participation at all. The turning I described at the start of this reading is a posture, not a feeling, and postures can be built before the feeling catches up to them. The second, widen what you are willing to count. Go back through the 4 disguises and check, honestly, whether something has already arrived in one of the first 3 forms and been dismissed for not matching the 4th. A considerable number of you are going to find that the apology has, in some genuine sense, already begun, quietly, in a form you were not watching for. The third, if a direct conversation is available to you and you want it, do not wait for them to raise it first. Vesper's father did raise it unprompted, and I would not want you to conclude from her story that waiting silently is the only path. If you have decided the relationship is worth the risk, a gentle, low-pressure opening from your side, mentioning the old evening without demanding anything of the response, is a legitimate and often underused option, and it does not contradict anything I have told you tonight about turning away from active waiting. There is a real difference between waiting and asking once, plainly, is not the posture I have been describing as the obstacle. And the 4th, and this is the one I most want you to take from Honor's story specifically. If it arrives, let yourself feel whatever you actually feel about it, even if what you feel is not the relief you expected. Anger, grief for lost time, a complicated tangle of gratitude and resentment sitting in the same chest at the same time, none of that means the apology was insufficient or that you are receiving it wrong. It means you are a whole person, with a whole history, receiving something that arrived later than it should have, and the complexity is not a failure of the process. It is simply what a genuine, overdue repair actually feels like from the inside, considerably more often than the tidy version anybody tells you to expect. Let me speak briefly to a few dimensions, because this arrives through a different door depending on where it lives. In romantic relationships, the apology, when it comes, is very often the first disguise, the improved version, rather than a direct statement, because a former partner will frequently find it easier to change how he treats you now than to explicitly name what he did before. Notice the pattern rather than waiting for the sentence. In family, which is honor's dimension, the delayed apology carries the heaviest complexity of all four disguises combined, and I would ask you to give yourself the longest runway of tonight's signs to actually process it, because decades of accumulated history do not settle in a single conversation, however genuine that conversation is. In friendship, the oblique reference is the most common form, because friendships rarely have the formal structure that makes a direct conversation feel natural, and a friend testing whether the subject is safe to approach will very often do it sideways, through a shared memory mentioned lightly, rather than head-on. And in your relationship with yourself, which deserves mention because a considerable number of you are waiting for an apology from a version of your own past self, a decision you made, a period you are not proud of, a way you once treated somebody before you knew better. That apology, my darlings, is available to you right now, in your own hand, and does not require a Mercury retrograde or anybody else's participation at all. Write it to yourself, if that is the one you have been quietly waiting for. Now let me give you the ritual, and it uses the image from the card tonight, and it is short. Find 20 minutes, somewhere you will not be interrupted. A white candle if you like one, for the flowers in the cups rather than for any particular planet. And if you have none, my darling, it changes nothing, because the object was never the mechanism. Take a piece of paper and draw 6 cups across the top, simply, in outline, however roughly you like. It does not need to be beautiful. In the first cup, write the apology you are actually hoping for, in full, in the exact words you would want to hear. In the second, write the version you would actually accept, which is very often smaller and more realistic than the first. In the third, write one of the 4 disguises, whichever you believe is most likely, and describe what it would look like arriving in that specific form. In the fourth, write one thing you have already built, or are building, that does not require their participation at all. The stopped waiting life, however small a piece of it currently exists. In the fifth, write the name of one person who already treats you the way you are hoping this apology will finally confirm you deserve to be treated. Somebody already facing you, sunflower-like, without needing any of this to have happened first. And in the sixth cup, leave it empty, and simply write beneath it, whatever arrives, arrives here. That sixth cup, my darlings, is the whole of the ritual's purpose. You are not filling it in advance, because you cannot know, tonight, exactly what form it will take, or exactly when it will come. You are simply building the other 5 cups, deliberately, so that your entire life is not balanced on the one that remains empty, and so that when something does arrive, in whatever disguise it chooses, it has an actual, specific place to land, rather than having to carry the weight of your entire waiting on its own. Keep the page, do not destroy it. Add to the 6th cup whenever something happens, however small, and watch it fill in slowly, in whatever disguise it chooses to wear. Now, my darlings, let me give you the thing I have been building toward the whole of this hour. I told you at the beginning that Mercury appears to travel backward across the sky several times a year, and that the apology you are waiting for behaves the same way, arriving as though it has reversed course after years of moving away from you. I want to give you one final piece of astronomy, because it is real, it is verifiable, and I think it is the most quietly beautiful fact in the whole of this practice. Mercury never actually moves backward. Not once, not ever, in the whole of its existence. Every planet in this solar system, including Mercury, orbits the Sun in the same direction, continuously, without reversing, and it has done so since the solar system formed. What we call retrograde motion is not the planet changing course. It is a trick of perspective, produced entirely by where we happen to be standing. Mercury moves in a smaller, faster orbit than Earth's, and periodically it laps us, the way a faster runner on an inside track periodically overtakes a slower one on an outside lane, and for the few weeks during which it is overtaking us, it appears, from our specific vantage point, to be traveling in reverse. The moment it has fully passed, the illusion resolves, and it is revealed to have been moving forward the entire time. My darlings, I want you to sit with what that actually means for tonight's reading, because I think it changes the whole of it. The person you are waiting on was never actually moving backward toward you either. They did not freeze, all those years, refusing to grow, and then suddenly reverse direction to finally say the thing. They were moving forward the whole time, on their own orbit, at their own speed, through their own version of the years that separated the wrong from the repair. What looked, from where you were standing, like an absence, like silence, like somebody stalled indefinitely and refusing to move, was very often somebody making her own slow, forward progress toward a version of herself capable of finally saying it, on a timeline you simply could not see from your particular vantage point. And when the apology finally arrives, my darling, and appears to be coming back to you after all that time, it is not actually reversing. It only looks that way because of where you have been standing. It has been moving toward this moment the entire time, on its own orbit, at its own pace, and the two of you have simply, finally, after however many years, lapped each other again. That is why the posture matters so much, my darlings. Standing still, watching one fixed point on the horizon, is the position from which every arrival looks like a reversal, mysterious and unpredictable. Building your own orbit, your own forward motion, your own stopped-waiting life, moving at your own pace toward your own particular sun, is the position from which an old arrival, when it finally laps you again, simply looks like what it actually is. Not a miracle, not a reversal. Two people who were always moving forward, finally occupying the same point in the sky again, briefly, long enough to exchange a cup of white flowers, before each of you continues on toward wherever you were already going. My darlings, before I let you go, 3 small things. 1. If any part of this reading found you tonight, if you recognized your own situation in one of the 4 disguises, if Vesper's certainty or Honor's complicated grief landed somewhere real, tap that like button. It is the simplest way to tell YouTube to carry this to somebody who has been standing still, watching one fixed point, for considerably longer than she needs to. 2. Subscribe and turn on the bell. I make these readings for every sign, and I make them so they can be found whenever somebody needs them, rather than only during a particular week. If you become a member, readings reach you before they are published, and you and I actually speak in the comments, because I read member comments first. 3, and this is the one I care about most. Fill in one of the 5 cups from tonight's ritual, right now, in the comments, in a single sentence. Not the whole page. 1 cup. I read every single comment, truly, and I want to tell you why I am asking for that, rather than the full story. Because a comment section full of 40 women, each filling in 1 cup, is 40 people quietly building the life that does not require the 6th one, in order to already be worth living, which is the entire lesson of tonight's reading, enacted in the space of a single comment box. And if this reading gave you something and you ever want to say thank you more directly, a super thanks is never expected and always felt, and it is a genuine part of how I keep making these readings as carefully as I make them. If you know somebody who is still standing at the same fixed point, watching, send this to her tonight. You may not realize how much a single share matters. It is how this work finds the person who needs it. Thank you, my darlings. This community has become something I genuinely did not expect when I began. These 5 zodiac signs will receive the apology they stopped waiting for. That is the title, and I want to close by telling you exactly what I mean by it, because it is not entirely what you thought when this hour began. It does not mean stopping is a strategy for summoning them faster, a trick to perform in order to make the arrival happen sooner. It means the stopping was always going to be the better life regardless, and that it also happens to be the only position from which an old, slow, genuinely forward-moving thing can finally be recognized when it laps you again. Libra, through the scale finally settling. Pisces, through the confirmation that you did not imagine it. Cancer, through an apology large enough to be received without minimizing it for anybody's comfort. Gemini, through the actual words, arriving at last through your own ruling planet's oldest function. And Leo, my darling, through a repair small enough and private enough to be received without an audience at all. You were never actually waiting in vain, my darlings. You were simply standing still, watching one point on the horizon, while something you had given up on was quietly, patiently, making its own way back around to you, on its own orbit, at its own pace, the whole time. Build your own orbit anyway. It was always the better use of the years. I am Madame Aurora from Manhattan, and I love you, all 12 signs of the Zodiac. I will see you in the next reading. Content. My darling Gemini, I see you. I see what you have been carrying. I see the version of you that has been checking your phone with a question you have not fully admitted to yourself for the past several weeks. The question is the message coming? You have not named the message specifically, you may. Pasted. My darling Leo, I see you. I see what you have been carrying, and I want to start this conversation by telling you something the cards keep showing me about you, something the stars are confirming with unusual clarity tonight. The universe is putting you first. Not in the metaphorical way astrologer pasted. My darlings, I see you, all of you. But tonight I want to speak directly to 4 of you. 4 signs in the Zodiac. 4 souls who are about to receive unexpected news in the next 6 weeks. I want to start this video by telling you something specific that almost no astrologer is talking about. Between pasted, my darling Virgo, I see you. I see what you have been carrying. And I want to start this conversation by telling you something that I do not usually say in my videos. Take a breath, a full one. In through the nose, out through the mouth. You are allowed to do that here. You are allowed to sit down, Jay. Pasted. My darling Leo, I see you. I see what you have been carrying. I see the version of you that has been quietly aware for the past few weeks that someone has been thinking of you. You have felt it. You have felt the way your phone has buzzed in your pocket, and you have looked half expecting it to be 2010. Pasted. My darlings, I see you, all of you. 12 signs, 12 souls, 12 different relationships with what is approaching. I want to start this video by telling you something specific that no astrologer should withhold from you. We are approximately 6 weeks away from one of the most consequential astrological eve, pasted. My darling Gemini, I see you. I see what you have been carrying. I see the version of you that has spent the last 4 weeks in a kind of fog that your sign rarely admits to being in. Mercury, your ruling planet, walking backward through your money house since June 29th, asking you to review every meals, pasted kullanabileceğin tanınmış astrolog isimleri, videoda gerçekten görüşlerine, içerik tarzlarına veya kamuya açık yorumlarına değineceğin zaman şu isimleri kullanabilirsin. Susan Miller, Astrology Zone, ayrıntılı aylık burç yorumlarıyla tanınıyor. Chani Nicholas/Chani, haftalık astroloji, güncel pasted 1. Astroloji alanındaki en büyük anahtar kelimeler, aşağıdaki hacimler, genel global web aramalarına ilişkin 3. taraf tahminleridir. YouTube'a, özel kesin rakam değildir. Ancak talebin büyüklüğünü ve hangi konuların sürekli arandığını anlamak için güçlü bir yön gösterir. Tahmini, yüksek hacimli ana, pasted,